Naval Station Kitsap, a sprawling beast of steel and sea on the Washington coast, was a place of perpetual gray. Gray ships, gray skies, and the gray utilitarian rhythm of military life. It was here, amidst the scent of salt water and diesel, that Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma worked, a ghost in a sea of uniforms. Officially, she was on a light-duty assignment, shuffled into the logistical heart of the base to recover from injuries that the official paperwork vaguely described as sustained during a deployment. The shrapnel scars hidden beneath her crisp Navy working uniform told a far more violent story, a tale of a dusty, faraway land and an explosion that had nearly ended her career. To the thousands of sailors and civilians who bustled through the supply depot, she was just another cog in the machine, an officer with a clipboard and a quiet, almost unnerving focus. She moved with an economy of motion that was rare, a coiled stillness that you wouldn't expect from someone tasked with tracking inventory. But the old hands, the grizzled master chiefs and senior NCOs who had seen generations of warriors come and go, they saw it. They saw the way her eyes constantly scanned her surroundings, the way she stood as if rooted to the earth, balanced and ready. They saw the subtle, unshakable bearing of someone who had walked through fire and emerged forged, not broken. To them, she wasn't just a logistics officer. She was a Trident wearer, a Navy SEAL, and that was a title that was carried in the soul long after the uniform was put away. Anya never spoke of her past. She didn't need to. Her silence was a shield, allowing her to heal both physically and mentally, far from the adrenaline and chaos that had defined her life for over a decade. The mundane world of shipping manifests and forklift schedules was its own kind of therapy. It was predictable. It was safe. But she was about to be reminded that the battlefield can take many forms, and sometimes the most insidious threats are the ones brewing right in your own backyard. In every corner of the military you'll find them, the ones who almost made it, the ones whose dreams were bigger than their discipline. At Kitsap, they called themselves the Concrete Kings, a crew of 5 men bound together not by accomplishment, but by the shared corrosive acid of failure. Their self-appointed leader was Marco Gallo, a man whose swagger couldn't quite hide the chip on his shoulder. He'd washed out of basic underwater demolition SEAL training, Bud S, during Hell Week, the infamous crucible that separates the determined from the merely ambitious. He'd been a star athlete, strong and fast, but the instructors had seen the fatal flaw in him. He was a frontline fighter with a back-row character. He blamed an injury, but everyone knew the truth. The cold had broken his spirit. His second-in-command was Leo J.T. Vance, a petty officer whose file was thick with minor infractions and a recurring theme of insubordination. For J.T., nothing was ever his fault. A failed promotion board was a conspiracy. A negative performance review was a personal vendetta. He saw shadows of injustice everywhere, except when he looked in the mirror. Then there was Dale Bishop, a heavy equipment operator with a temper as short as his fuse. He'd been kicked out of the Marine Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Team, FAST, for what the paperwork politely called behavioral issues. In reality, he'd picked one too many fights, unable to distinguish between controlled aggression and pure, reckless rage. Evan Reed was the dreamer, a reservist who talked a big game about special operations but spent his weekends fixing engines. He saw the Concrete Kings as his ticket to belonging, a substitute for the elite brotherhood he'd never earned. He mistook their arrogance for strength, their cynicism for wisdom. Finally, there was Cody Holt, a civilian contractor who wore tactical pants and military-style boots as if they were a costume. He had never served a day in his life but spoke with the unearned authority of a combat veteran, dropping military acronyms he'd learned from movies. He clung to the group, feeding off their perceived power, a parasite on their collective resentment. Together, they were a vortex of toxic masculinity, and their gaze had fallen on Lieutenant Commander Sharma. They watched her quiet competence, her effortless authority, and saw it as an affront. They didn't see a warrior in recovery. They saw a woman who, in their twisted view, had been given something she hadn't earned. Their whispers started in the break room, a poison that spread with every shared smirk. They gave her a nickname, one they thought was clever and cutting, the trophy commander. In their minds, she was a product of a politically correct Navy, a woman promoted to a position she couldn't possibly deserve. They resented the respect the senior chiefs gave her, a respect they themselves so desperately craved but had no idea how to earn. The campaign of harassment began not with a bang, but with 1,000 tiny deliberate cuts. It was designed to be deniable, to make Anya look oversensitive if she complained. A pallet of crucial supplies would be accidentally misplaced, forcing her to spend hours hunting it down. Loud, pointed jokes about female officers would erupt just as she walked by the loading dock. Tools she needed would vanish from her workspace, only to reappear later in plain sight. Gallo was the architect of these petty provocations. He'd stand a little too close in a narrow aisle, forcing her to step aside. Vance would question her directives with a thinly veiled sneer, couching his insubordination in the language of professional inquiry. Bishop would rev the engine of his forklift aggressively as she crossed the lot, a low-grade game of chicken. Anya saw it all. She recognized the strategy immediately. It was a classic insurgency tactic designed to destabilize and provoke an overreaction. She had dismantled more sophisticated networks in the mountains of Afghanistan. So she did what she was trained to do. She observed, she documented, and she waited. Every misplaced pallet, every insubordinate comment, every near miss with the forklift was logged in a small private notebook with the date, time, and personnel involved. She remained impeccably professional, her voice never rising, her demeanor calm and unwavering. Her composure infuriated them. They wanted a reaction, tears, anger, a complaint to a superior that would make her look weak. She gave them nothing but cool, detached efficiency. One afternoon, Master Chief Petty Officer Frank Miller, a man with a face like a wrinkled sea chart and decades of service in his eyes, stopped her by the coffee machine. "Commander," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you seein' what those clowns are doing, right?" Anya simply nodded, pouring her coffee. "I see it, Master Chief." "Ignoring 'em won't make 'em go away," he warned. "Vermin like that, you give 'em an inch, they take a mile. They see your silence as fear." "I appreciate the concern, Frank," she replied, her gaze steady. "But they're making a mistake. They think this is their territory. They'll get bolder. And when they do, they'll show everyone exactly who they are." She knew he was right. She wasn't ignoring them. She was giving them rope. She was baiting a trap with her own seeming passivity. She knew that men like these, starved for validation and driven by insecurity, could not resist the urge to escalate. It was only a matter of time before they crossed a line they could never uncross. The base had a designated spot for unwinding, a gravel lot with a few rusted fire pits where off-duty personnel could gather. It was a place of cheap beer, bad country music, and the loud, boisterous laughter of sailors letting off steam. Anya rarely went there, but that Friday night she was waiting to hand off a critical parts manifest to a night shift supervisor. She stood off to the side, bathed in the flickering orange glow of the flames, the night air cool against her skin. That's when they saw her. The concrete kings, several beers deep, swaggered over, their laughter loud and forced. Gallo led the way, a predatory grin on his face. "Well, well, look what we have here," he slurred, his voice carrying across the lot. "The trophy commander, all by her lonesome." Anya didn't respond, her eyes calm, her body language neutral. She just wanted the handoff so she could leave. But they weren't going to let her. They formed a loose circle around her, their presence cutting her off from the rest of the crowd. "You know, Commander," Vance chimed in, stepping closer, "we were just talking about how some people get things they didn't earn. Like this, for instance." Before Anya could react, Gallo lunged. He didn't hit her. He did something far more symbolic. He grabbed the collar of her Navy working uniform blouse, the fabric tearing with a sharp rip. Bishop and Holt pinned her arms as Gallo tore the garment from her shoulders, leaving her standing in her thin undershirt. On the sleeve of the discarded blouse was the patch she had worn with quiet pride, the special warfare insignia, the Navy SEAL Trident. Gallo held it up for a moment, his face a mask of drunken contempt. "Stolen valor," he spat, the words dripping with venom. Then, with a theatrical flourish, he tossed the blouse into the fire pit. The crowd went quiet. The music seemed to die. All eyes were on the fire as the synthetic fabric curled, blackened, and then melted. The golden threads of the trident, the symbol of a brotherhood forged in the most demanding training on Earth, dissolved into the flames. The concrete kings erupted in laughter, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the sudden silence. Anya didn't scream. She didn't fight. She didn't even look at them. As their laughter washed over her, a profound and terrifying coldness settled deep within her. She simply turned and walked away from the circle, her back straight, her stride measured. The humiliation they had intended to inflict had failed. It had been replaced by something far more dangerous: resolve. As she walked into the darkness, she was already pulling out her phone, dialing a number that wasn't in the base directory. It was a number that connected her to a world the concrete kings couldn't even imagine existed. The game was over. The hunt was about to begin. The next morning, the Saturday routine at Naval Station Kitsap was shattered. It began with a vehicle that didn't belong. A sleek black government-issue SUV with tinted windows rolled through the main gate, bypassing the usual security checks with an electronic pass that made the guards snap to attention. It moved with a silent, predatory grace, coming to a stop in the parking lot of the supply depot. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma. But this was not the quiet logistics officer from yesterday. She was dressed in full combat gear. A plate carrier vest hugged her torso, its pouches filled with magazines. A sidearm was holstered securely on her thigh. Her helmet was clipped to her belt, and on the front of her vest, stitched in muted tactical thread, was the very symbol they had tried to destroy: the Navy SEAL Trident. It wasn't a patch on a uniform. It was a part of her, an emblem of her identity. Every head turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Sailors stopped what they were doing, their eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and awe. She crossed the parking lot with the same deliberate, powerful stride she used when walking toward a target. In one hand, she carried a ruggedized, handcuffed briefcase. The click of her boots on the asphalt was the only sound in the suddenly silent lot. As if on cue, a second black SUV pulled in behind the first. From this one emerged Captain Reynolds, the base commanding officer himself, his face set like granite. The message was immediate and brutally clear. This was not a personal matter. This was official. The entire power structure of the base had just descended on this forgotten corner of logistics. Forklift engines were cut. Radios went silent. The atmosphere crackled with a tension that was thicker than the morning fog rolling in off the Puget Sound. Everyone knew, without a single word being spoken, that the world had just shifted on its axis. Anya Sharma was not who they thought she was, and a reckoning was coming. The concrete kings had heard the whispers. They'd seen the black SUVs. But arrogance is a powerful blinder. They saw Anya's arrival not as a threat, but as a challenge, a final desperate act they could crush. They cornered her in the vast, cavernous equipment bay, a maze of towering steel shelves and hanging chains known as the cage. It was mid-morning, and the area was temporarily deserted. "Look what we got here," Gallo sneered, blocking the main aisle. The other four fanned out, cutting off any escape. "Playing dress-up, Commander? You think that costume scares us?" He reached out and shoved her, a test. Anya didn't move an inch. She just looked at him, her eyes cold and empty of emotion. "This is your last chance to walk away, Gallo," she said, her voice low and even. Vance laughed and knocked the radio from her belt, sending it skittering across the concrete floor. "No more calling for help," he mocked. That was the last mistake they would make. Gallo charged first, a clumsy, rage-fueled bull rush. Anya didn't retreat. She pivoted on the ball of her foot, a movement so fluid and fast it was almost imperceptible. Using his own momentum against him, she guided him past her, her hand gripping the back of his neck. She slammed his head into a solid steel support beam with a sickening thud. Gallo collapsed in a heap, unconscious before he hit the ground. One down. Bishop the brawler came next, swinging wild, telegraphed punches. Anya deflected the first blow, stepped inside his reach and seized his arm. With a brutal efficiency born of countless hours of training, she twisted it into a joint lock, hyperextending his elbow. A high-pitched scream tore from his throat as bone ground against ligament. He crumpled to the floor, cradling his ruined arm. 2 down. From the side, Cody Holt, the civilian contractor, swung a heavy length of loading chain, a makeshift flail. Anya dropped low, the chain whistling through the air where her head had been. As she came up, she swept his legs out from under him. He landed hard on his back, the air exploding from his lungs in a pained gasp. 3 down. Evan Reed, the reservist, froze for a split second, his face a mask of terror. That was all the time Anya needed. She closed the distance in a single step and delivered a powerful, precise strike to his solar plexus. Reed folded like a cheap suit, collapsing to his knees, gagging for breath he couldn't find. 4 down. J.T. Vance, the one who always blamed everyone else, saw his entire world crumble in the space of 10 seconds. His bravado evaporated, replaced by pure animal panic. He turned and ran. He made it about 20 feet before he collided with a wall of navy blue. Captain Reynolds and a team of armed master-at-arms stood blocking the exit, their faces grim. Vance was in handcuffs before he could even process what had happened. Anya stood in the center of the carnage, not even breathing heavily. 4 men were writhing or unconscious on the floor around her. One was in custody. She stood there, a silent, deadly instrument of justice, her point made with a clarity that no words could ever achieve. The showdown was over. The unmasking was about to begin. Captain Reynolds surveyed the scene in the cage, the groaning men on the floor, the dangling chain, the stunned faces of the MPs. He then looked at Anya, who stood calmly amidst the chaos she had so efficiently created. He gave a single, sharp nod. It was time. They gathered the senior enlisted and officers of the command in the main briefing room. The air was thick with rumor and speculation. The concrete kings, with the exception of the unconscious Gallo who was now in the base infirmary, were marched in under guard, their faces a mixture of defiance and dawning horror. Then Captain Reynolds and Anya Sharma walked to the front of the room. He placed the handcuffed briefcase she had carried onto the podium and unlocked it. He didn't open it. He just let it sit there, a symbol of the gravity of the situation. For the past several months, Captain Reynolds began, his voice ringing with authority, one of our own has been the target of a persistent and escalating campaign of harassment, insubordination, and assault. These actions culminated last night in the deliberate destruction of a United States Navy uniform. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. These men, he said, gesturing to the disgraced crew, believed they were targeting a vulnerable officer. They believed her silence was weakness. They were catastrophically wrong. He turned to Anya. Lieutenant Commander, please identify yourself for the command. Anya stepped forward. Her voice, though quiet, filled the room, cutting through the tension like a razor. I am Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma, United States Navy. My primary designator is Special Warfare. A collective gasp went through the room. The whispers turned to stunned silence. She wasn't finished. Last night, these men burned my uniform blouse. On that blouse was my trident, the one I earned by graduating Buds Class 234, the one I wore on 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, the one I was wearing when my team rescued 3 kidnapped aid workers from a heavily fortified compound in the Korangal Valley, and the one I was wearing when an IED blast awarded me the injuries I came to this base to recover from, along with this. Captain Reynolds opened the briefcase. Inside, nestled in foam, was a medal on a blue ribbon adorned with a single silver star. The Silver Star, the 3rd highest military combat decoration. He held it up for all to see. Lieutenant Commander Sharma received the Silver Star for gallantry in action, for exposing herself to enemy fire to drag 2 wounded teammates to safety. Her service record, which I have reviewed this morning, is one of the most distinguished I have ever seen. She is not a trophy commander. She is a decorated war hero. He turned his piercing gaze on the remaining concrete kings. The color had drained from their faces. The smug arrogance was gone, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. They hadn't been taunting a logistics officer. They had been tormenting a legend. They had mocked her uniform, unaware that she had bled for it. They had burned her trident, a symbol she had earned through trials they couldn't even survive in their nightmares. The truth hadn't just been revealed. It had been dropped on them like a bomb. Justice in the military can be a slow, grinding machine. But when the evidence is this overwhelming, and the insult this profound, it moves with the speed and force of a lightning strike. The investigation was a formality. Anya's detailed logs, the audio from her recovered radio which had captured the initial confrontation, and the testimony of a dozen eyewitnesses to the fire pit incident created an ironclad case. The consequences were swift and severe, tailored to each man's particular brand of failure. Marco Gallo, the ringleader, was the first to fall. The concussion he'd received from the steel beam led to a medical review. The Navy, taking a close look at his entire file and the pattern of his behavior, determined he was no longer fit for service. He was medically discharged, his dream of being a warrior ending with a whimper in a hospital bed, a permanent stain on his record. Dale Bishop's broken arm was just the beginning. His history of violence combined with the unprovoked assault led to his immediate reassignment. He was sent to the most remote, undesirable posting imaginable, a weather station in the Aleutian Islands, where he would spend his days performing manual labor, stripped of all rank and responsibility. His career as a fighter was over. Cody Holt, the civilian, learned that pretending to be a warrior has its price. His contractor badge was revoked, his security clearance permanently voided. He was escorted to the front gate by MPs and banned from ever setting foot on any federal installation again. He was cast out, a fraud exposed. Evan Reed and J.T. Vance faced an administrative separation board. They were found guilty of conduct unbecoming, and their careers were terminated. They weren't just fired. They were branded for life with a discharge that would follow them into the civilian world, a permanent marker of their failure, their cowardice, and their profound lack of judgment. Within 48 hours, the concrete kings ceased to exist. 5 men, united by their bitterness, had collectively destroyed their own futures. They had set a fire, intending to burn a woman's pride, and had ended up incinerating their own lives, leaving nothing but ash. After that day, the air at Naval Station Kitsap changed. The story of Lieutenant Commander Sharma spread not like a wildfire, but like a rising tide, quietly and unstoppably. The senior NCOs told the story to the junior sailors, not as gossip, but as a lesson. New training modules on respect for wounded warriors and veterans on administrative assignment were implemented across the base. Anya Sharma remained at her post in the logistics hub. She sought no accolades, gave no interviews, and made no speeches. She simply went back to work, her movements just as quiet, her focus just as intense. She still carried herself like a coiled spring, but now everyone understood what that tension meant. They saw the trident on her uniform not just as a pin, but as a promise. Her silence was no longer misinterpreted. It was understood as the quiet confidence of someone who has nothing to prove. Her stillness was no longer seen as passivity, but as the disciplined patience of a predator. She had never wanted their fear, only their professionalism. Now she had their respect, and it was a respect that was absolute, earned not in a briefing room, but in the dust and fire of a world they would never know. The quiet warrior of Raven Point had reminded them all that the most dangerous waters are often the ones that run the deepest. So what can we take away from Anya Sharma's story? For me, the most powerful lesson is about the danger of making assumptions. Those men looked at her and saw only what their own prejudice allowed them to see. They judged her based on her gender and her quiet demeanor, and that judgment led to their ruin. It is a powerful reminder to look past the surface and treat everyone with a baseline of respect, because you never, ever know the battles they have fought or the strength they hold inside. True strength doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to brag. It simply is. What do you think? Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone's quiet nature was mistaken for weakness? How did it turn out? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your stories. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I wish you all good health and the wisdom to see the strength in others. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It truly helps the channel grow. We'll see you next time.